I'm just going to briefly introduce the panel. The moderator for today will be Dana Winograd, Director of Operations from Plastic Free Seas, and her three panelists will be Iris Lamb, Director of Food and Beverage Design and Sustainable Development, Mandarin Oriental, Doug Woodring, Founder and Managing Director, Ocean Recovery Alliance, and then finally Carmen, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce this correctly, Director of Sustainability, Langham Hospitality Group. So let me introduce you the moderator first, Dana. So Dana is the Director of Operation of Plastic Free Seas, having joined when it started in 2013. She has lived in Hong Kong for over 24 years and first got involved with environmental issues in 2007 when she helped drive recycling in Discovery Bay, where she lives. Seeing that it would take more than recycling to help solve the problem of plastic marine pollution, Dana joined Plastic Free Seas at its inception to help promote change in people's use of plastic through education and action, and has delivered talks on waste reduction and personal behavior change to students from kindergarten through to university, as well as to adults within the corporate program. Plastic Free Seas has reached over 65,000 students in 175 schools, or more than that, through in-class, beach, and sea programs, and more than 80 companies over the past 6 years. So impressive numbers there. Dana is going to be the knowledgeable moderator here today, and I'll let Dana now to continue to introduce our speakers today.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Christelle, thank you very much for the introductory talk. That is, as always, very interesting. And I'd like to say that Plastic Free Seas is very lucky to have been able to work on many research projects over the past few years, including some of those pictures, I believe. So we're very lucky to have you here today. I'll just get started introducing our guests. We are happy to invite Iris Lamb, who is the Director of Food and Beverage Design and Sustainable Development for Mandarin Oriental Hotel Group today. She supports the design and development of restaurants, bars, and banquet facilities across the group, working with various stakeholders to translate from conceptual stage into the final F&B operation. Iris actively leads the group's concerns pertaining to food and beverage sustainability initiatives with a team of like-minded and passionate colleagues.
Great. Thank you, Dana. Good morning, everyone. I'm Iris from Mandarin Oriental, and it's my pleasure to share an overview of our single-use elimination plastic journey from across the group and drilling down to highlight our approach within our F&B division. So as a hotel group, we've taken a fairly bold approach by pledging to eliminate all single-use plastics across our global portfolio. That includes 33 hotels across 23 countries. And we're hoping to do this by the end of March 2021. So now we're just over half a year out from that target date. And from tracking approximately 60 common plastic items group-wide, we've now reached about a 64% elimination progress with these items. So our motivation is straightforward. As Christelle has already exemplified in her presentation, plastic waste is one of the gravest environmental concerns affecting the planet today. So we're certainly not the largest hotel group, and arguably our global footprint relatively modest, but we believe as a luxury hotel group, we have an opportunity to drive the change that we want to see in this industry. Next slide, please. So we started this campaign over 2 years ago, and back then the task at hand was quite daunting. Like, where does one start? That was honestly the thought in many of our minds. And within the food and beverage division, we identified a working group of key colleagues to review our front of house and back of house areas. So from there, we brainstormed and developed a list of over 20 items in food and beverage, and further grouped them into 3 phases. And this helped us organize our plan of attack. So the first phase focused on what we call low-hanging fruits, or basically more straightforward items to eliminate. And we would say that we already saw alternatives to plastic. So items might have included things like straws, takeaway containers, cups, cutleries, tasting spoons, cocktail picks, etc. So these were the first on our hit list. And we saw there were items like renewable materials, or even not using it themselves, such as straws, in our beverage offerings. The second phase focused on items that required more review on our part, such as what alternative products and solutions were in the market, because there seemed to be not very many eco alternatives: gloves, garbage bags, cling film, and some of them having technical or food safety requirements that we needed in our kitchens. So we needed to study that a little bit more. There's also plastic water bottles, which we've favored in-house filtered and bottled systems. But as we rolled this out across the group, having successful examples in Hong Kong and Macau, we realized that legislation changes in different parts of the world, such as in China, where it may not be as straightforward. So we started to look at next best options, such as maybe looking at aluminum bottles and ideally not shipped around the world. And finally, the third phase are items that require external commitment. Maybe it requires more further product development, such as vacuum bags, which we're still struggling with for sous vide cooking, and also items that require supplier commitment, such as suppliers' packaging. So whatever we're doing, we're hoping that with a responsible procurement framework, this will help us communicate these requirements better and really help foster that communication so that we can work with suppliers to achieve our goals. So one takeaway I want to leave is that for our industry, we need to rally together to raise demand for quality eco alternatives to plastics, ensure that they can be achieved at a relatively cost-effective manner. And really that comes with us rallying together, because in our plight, we've seen that sometimes these items that we're identifying come at 10 times, 12 times premium to what our classic plastic items currently cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iris, and we will get back to you in a little bit with some questions. And now I would like to introduce Carmen from the Langham Hospitality Group. She's the Director of Sustainability, and in her role, she leads and drives the sustainability strategy within the group. She is responsible for a diverse range of sustainability programs, including strategy and policy development, management systems, capacity building, stakeholder engagement, communication, and reporting. She also believes sustainability is everyone's responsibility, and her role is implanting this concept like a DNA into every colleague in the company. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you, Iris, for sharing. I learned a lot from Mandarin Oriental as well. So a little bit background about Langham Hospitality Group. So as many of you might know that like the Langham will be under our group, but also we have another brand which is Quarters, a 5-star hotel. And also that within our mother company, we have a sister brand that is G.R.E.E.N. So so basically that we have 3 hotels locating in Hong Kong, and it's lucky that like I've been with the company for 10 years now. Actually, next month will be 10 years with the company. And in the last 10 years that like I've been, as Dana mentioned, that like I believe that it's a DNA that like, you know, everyone's responsibility in sustainability. So I basically literally almost spent the last 10 years to implement this DNA into everyone's mindset. So that's why that this year that we are ready, and then we are happy to share that like we have a 10 years sustainability commitment that announced that we want to achieve in 2030. And one of the commitment in there that is related to waste is we pledge to send 0 waste to landfill by 2030. And for plastic, and if you see here that we also started since 2018, that like each year we phase out or replacing some of the single-use plastic items, and ideally that we hope that like by 2022 we will place many of the single-use plastic items, and then by 2025 all other single-use disposal items. So like we try to, I think is a vision that we try to move away from a very disposable lifestyle, that like the convenient disposable lifestyle, to be more like, you know, more we will turn into more, actually we prefer more reusable, not like, you know, biodegradable, compostable. Like we have a lot of discussion with that, like, you know, what are the good alternatives? I mean, in the end, of course, we don't use that item, or we use the reusable item. And of course, when we started this single-use plastic removal replacement journey globally, we start to see some challenges. Like when we first look at, it's like just several items. Sorry, just the previous slide. And then like we start the last 2 years, several items that we phased out, and then but we find out more. And then I believe that that's why Iris mentioned that there are 60 plus items that is like we found that is a single-use plastic, and it's not easy to find replacement because we have other concerns, like not only cost but also hygiene. And but it's good thing that this is almost the right time that we all together that we will phase out the single-use plastic. Next slide, please. Because actually we started out this journey since 2013. With our hotel G.R.E.E.N. So for our G.R.E.E.N. hotel, is actually the first hotel in Hong Kong to implement a in-house glass bottling systems for meeting and for all guest rooms. So we replaced, there's no plastic bottles in everywhere in the hotel, and since 2013, and it's now 7 years already. It's still like, you know, just several hotels are using in-house glass bottling system. Of course, we had challenge throughout the year. We tried to implement the system within the hotels as well, but it's not easy, we've realized. And of course, there are other things that, you know, we learned from G.R.E.E.N. is like we changed to bathroom amenities. We also look into a dispenser. We have a co-working space. We offer water dispenser, and even for public area, we also offer water dispenser so that people can bring in their water bottle to refill their water bottle. And but since last year, and in all of a sudden, and it comes very quickly, that since last year July, that like starting from Shanghai hotels, that we were told that like due to the local city government regulations, that we need to remove the 6 little items that might be, quite some of you might be aware that the 6 little items in the guest room amenities, and those are disposable items. And if this policy or guidelines start rolling out to other cities, until now, so we're still rolling out to other cities. And actually, it's interesting to see that, you know, when the Chinese government tried to implement this policy, is actually the 6 little items, it grows to 8 little items, and then 7 little items in other cities, because they learn. Because the very first time that when they start implement is they take away, the only one key thing I remember is toothbrush. And because that's the only item that we always get requests, because we just remove the items, but then we are still available for those items upon request. So that's why we can get calls, like 200 calls a night, that like to get a toothbrush. And then later on, we found out in other cities that they allow to keep the toothbrush in the guest room, but some other items out in the guest room. So, and we learn also from here is very clear communication with your guests. As you see the photos here, that like, you know, ensure the guests understanding why these items are not found in the room, because like, you know, we want to, you know, it's a city regulations, guidelines. These items are still available. We can offer you upon your request. And we haven't really received any complaint at all in our China hotels. And in just this, I think last month and 2 months ago, also China like start, you know, promoting, advocating like, you know, food waste as well, like try to clean your plate, reduce the amount of food wastage. And it's all just come to like, and I just see our hotel start, you know, we start with our staff canteen as well. Like, you know, it comes very, all these like, you know, regulations will come very quickly. And I think this is why, like, you know, we put down a long-term commitment in seeing that it's a global international trend that we will minimize our wastage. But as a company, as a group, that we need to perhaps that like a step in advance that get us prepared before the regulation comes in. So if you want more information, you can look at our sustainability report on our website, or you can feel free to contact me through LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Very ambitious goals, actually, by both of our hotel companies. I can't wait for the discussion on that and to understand a little bit more about how you think you're going to get there. I would like now to introduce Doug Woodring. Doug is one of Asia's leading experts on the topic of plastic pollution in the environment. He is the founder and managing director of Ocean Recovery Alliance, which is also 10 years old. So congratulations to both you and Carmen on your 10-year anniversary. Ocean Recovery Alliance is a nonprofit organization focused on bringing innovative solutions, technology, collaborations, and policy together to impact positive improvements for the health of the ocean. It is one of the only NGOs that has been working on this topic globally and not being based in a Western country. 2 of their international programs were launched at the Clinton Global Initiative in 2010, and it is one of the few NGOs to have worked with both the World Bank and UNEP on this topic. So I'd like to introduce Doug now, please.
Thank you, Dana. Thanks, everyone. And I just give a quick overview of some of the things that we work on. We, as Dana said, we've been doing this for over 10 years. We're based in Hong Kong. We also have a US charity entity, but we do a lot of global work. Hong Kong's a small place, and a lot of the waste that we see here in our oceans and beaches is from cross-border sources, which means it's a bit like air pollution. It moves around in the sea with the currents and the winds from many, many different countries, and we all use plastic globally. So this has been something we've really been focusing on in terms of policies on how companies and municipalities and governments can try to make big scale changes along the way with the ocean as the benefactor. So in fact, most of the work that we do is not in the ocean. It's not on cleanup side, but it's really trying to drive new thinking in plastic packaging, reuse of materials, reduction in use, better municipality collection and servicing. There's a huge under capacity globally for recycling and waste management, and that's why it gets lost to the sea. People have nowhere to put it, essentially. We, as Dana mentioned, had 2 projects we announced at the Clinton Global Initiative 10 years ago, which were probably 8 years too early for the world to sort of use these. But one of them was the Plastic Disclosure Project, which I can talk about in a minute or later, which is much like carbon and water footprinting. So if you're thinking of the circular economy, very hard to know what to circulate if you don't measure what you have in the first place and understand the volumes that you might be using, recovering, use recycled content. Maybe you're using biomaterials. We talk about that a bit today. The other one is an app called Global Alert. It allows anyone in the world to report trash hotspots in the world's waters. That was partly funded by the World Bank. It's in Spanish and English. And it's a bit like Waze for traffic. You take 3 photos and GPS it. But we're a small group. We can't knock on everyone's door and work with every watershed around the world, but we have created the backbone of technology that any watershed in the world could use, all on a unified platform. So that's something we've done, and it's now both of these programs are gaining speed as people finally are realizing they have to look at the creeks and the rivers and the outflows because that's where the stuff gets into the ocean from. We run an event called Plasticity, which is something we launched at the Rio Earth Summit in 2020. 2012. We've had it in 13 countries or 13 cities. Hong Kong, we had it in 2013 with at the Asia Society. This is all about basically reincarnated plastic, how to find the value for second life plastic. Second life plastic is once your product or package is finished with its initial use, where's it going to go? We don't want it to go to a landfill. We don't want it to burn it. We don't want it to get into our environment. So can you make something from it? Even if it's fuel, even if it's concrete or asphalt, needs to go somewhere. And today it's not going anywhere. That's why we have a big problem. We like using creative surprise. We do work with art and kids and big events when we can. We've done some great work in Cambodia recently. Here we have an image of the monks who we engaged within 1 hour of working with them to pull plastic out of the trees, because in the Tonle Sap Lake, the water rises and falls 6 meters every year. It's the only place in the world where that happens, pulling the plastic out of the villages and back into the villages on a 6-month cycle. And we've done a full grassroots program there the last 3 years. Thanks to the Mandarin for some of their support as well, actually, on this. And now we have the Ministry of Environment, all local government, everyone fully supporting it. And one of the neat things I think that engage people is we call it a festival. It's called the Water Rising Festival and the Water Falling Festival. It's not called a cleanup. And that change in messaging when you're doing one of these programs can make a very big difference in the way that you get acceptance from local stakeholders, local governments, local communities, and the way that they feel, you know, excited or burdened by a program that you might be doing. So look forward to talking more today. Thank you.
Can you hear? Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Doug. We have an interesting look here today because we've got hotels who are on the ground dealing directly with the guests and the problems associated with the food waste that, or sorry, the packaging waste that's created. And then we've got Doug, who's taking a bit bigger look at this, and hopefully we'll have some good insights from his plastic disclosure project to share with us that will be maybe ideas that can be implemented across the board. So we're going to start, I think, our questions with Iris. Thank you, Iris. You guys have set some fairly hefty targets, all single-use plastics by March 2021. I want to ask you, though, this has obviously been a long process. This didn't start yesterday. So there are a lot of people in our audience who maybe aren't quite where you are and don't necessarily have the resources to put into all of the work to finding these solutions that you have come up with. So I was wondering if you could just share one of, well, maybe your biggest learning opportunity, which may have translated into a big fail that you have experienced with regard to reducing plastic that could be helpful for other guests on other people starting this journey. Sure.
So we, as I mentioned, we started as a group about 2 years ago for this journey. So it's taken us this much to realize that a big learning opportunity is accepting the fact that the terminology is all over the place. And we're still navigating it today. And that's been an ongoing challenge in our campaign, you know, as we push forwards towards this goal. And there's so many terms, right? There's renewable materials, degradable, biodegradable, compostable, bioplastics, right? So what was the takeaway? Because we've definitely gone through all the rabbit holes and then come up, and I'll give an example. There are products where they'll say that they are a percentage bio-based, 45% bio-based packaging and 100% recyclable. What does that mean? So basically that indicates this eco product is comprised of 45% renewable eco materials, maybe like bamboo, parts like this, and the other 55% are a mix of synthetic plastics. Not good. So it sounds good, and unfortunately we go through this experience of believing we found a great alternative, and it doesn't comply with what our objective is. So what I've deduced with our team is right now, presently, the best resources are generally natural, renewable items I mentioned bamboo, for example, or that items that are plant-based. Another label that we could look for is home compostable grade. Home compostable grade, which you see a lot with a certification called TUV Austria for bioplastics. And that suggests that it can be broken down in a home composter or naturally within 6 to 12 months in the landfill. So with that being said, I saw there's quite a few questions that are coming up, but what we have learned is there are regional differences, and that sometimes with compostability, you require industrial facilities, even with recycling. And let's look case in point in Hong Kong. We don't even have that infrastructure here. So it's very easy for us to get very excited with a lot of the, I'd say, the green terminology that's being thrown to kind of appease this rising demand to seek eco alternatives. But we really need to start drilling deep, because there are items like the term oxo-biodegradable, which basically means, sounds good, right? It's self-destructing over a period of time. But now we're realizing that that's probably leaving trace microplastics, which is again not the objective here when we're making this pledge to be single-use plastic free.
Thanks, Iris. I think my takeaway from that is that you have to dig deep into what you're looking at. Don't take things for granted that if it says it's degradable or biodegradable, it may not be. And I'm hoping that we can maybe have at a later date some sharing of this information so that your learnings can be understood by others soon, I would hope. A second question we have for you is COVID. Now, we didn't talk too much about COVID, but I believe COVID has had a really big impact on your, particularly your food and beverage operations. So you mentioned when we were talking that there were some big changes in your food and beverage packaging areas, and that you did have to do a lot of research on that. What are the big changes that have taken place, and do you think a lot of them are going to be kept into the future, or are they kind of just COVID related, and once this whole scare is over, things will go back to the way they were before?
Actually, because we had made this pledge 2 years ago, there was a lot of transferable learnings and also solutions, I should say, for the takeaway packaging. It's true. As travel halted, we needed to pivot our F&B business to take care of the domestic guests that were coming into the hotels. And so takeaway business and delivery offerings rose. And with that came the increase in our takeaway packaging. So if you recall from my presentation, there was a chart where we listed sort of the low-hanging fruits. And fortunately, takeaway packaging falls in what we can say there are ample alternatives in the market, and a lot of them which we think are quite good and eco-friendly. So for example, if we look at takeaway bags, there are a lot of disposable paper bags. We can also identify compostable bioplastic bags made from starch or made from tapioca or cassava, and are actually 100% biodegradable. And even come across some products that are made from essentially from water and can be edible. So these are very interesting solutions that we've come across. Same thing for containers, condiment containers, cups and lids, cutleries and spoons. So these are things that, I mean, speaking to everybody in the industry, I don't think we're looking to keep this as a trade secret, because we're all going to benefit from making this a normal part of, you know, the packaging materials that we're sourcing. So, I mean, please feel free to reach out following this presentation, because I think that's really why we're here, to talk about this, increase the demand, and normalize this as part of how we do things in takeaway.
Thank you. I'm just glancing at the questions that are coming up, and one that jumped out at me was on PLA. So I just wanted to ask you, through your research, what would be your feelings on the use of PLA products?
I think with the use of PLA products, you need to continue to dig deeper, because PLA is such a broad topic. And as I've identified, you've got to look at the region that you're, and sort of the infrastructure that's in place to help support whether or not you can you have the composting facilities to break it down. And then secondly, by digging deeper and going back to the company and the supplier and telling them, this is my objective, can you provide some more due diligence for me to review? And that's something that we've been encouraging our teams when they're reviewing with their suppliers. What kind of supporting documentation do you have? Is it certification? Is it a pledge, etc.? And once you look into it, you'll realize there are things like, as I cited, 45%. Not quite there yet, right? There's still quite a lot of plastics involved in that product. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, no, I think so. We'll see in the questions that follow on if that was what they were asking. So Carmen, thank you very much for sharing today with us. You mentioned bottles, that in your Eaton hotel, you've gotten rid of all of your plastic bottles, but that this is still a work in progress in other hotels. And I'm actually quite surprised at that. I would have thought that in the luxury hotel industry, at this point in time, it would really be considered one of those low-hanging fruits that and customers would be open to it, accepting of it, and you could provide them with assurances on the water. So could you explain a little bit more about what are the problems with getting rid of these single-use plastic bottles?
I think one key concern that we have in the among all our hotels from around the world is the hygiene. So the perception of hygiene, especially nowadays, and actually since we start looking into the alternatives of a plastic bottle, and I think one thing that we see that is for the last 2 years, and I think Iris also mentioned that it's not only like, in-house glass bottling system is the only solution for the alternatives, although we see that that is the best solution because it's reusable and then it's actually reduced a lot of local transportation of the logistics, and so also lower the carbon footprint of the bottles as well. But the installation, the plants will have also need to fulfill the local requirement, legislative requirements. So is it considered, because it's such a new concept, and then is it considered as a food and beverage production plant licensing? It really depends on the local regulation, and sometimes even certain places that we have that they have no idea if it should be considered, it can be covered in your food license, or it can be, you need to apply for another production plant license. So that gives actually, that, and then, sometimes regulation could change because of the trend and situation. So, and that's why we're still looking for we are this in 2000 best we have time manufacturer to produce this plant and equipment, and then now we more options, and all that. It also depends on the local recycling facility. For example, it is still a very high concern of our customers, and if we cannot use in-house glass bottling system because of the local regulation, we need to look into alternatives like aluminum cans, as Iris mentioned, or even Tetra Pak. And Tetra Pak recycling is quite mature in China, in certain cities. So if there's infrastructure that supports the recycling of that material, you should consider that. When you take to do that, that will actually be quite complicated. But we are very happy to see that we now also see options. I think one hotel in Hong Kong start testing is to have a tap, another tap that in the guest room, so that it's a filter water tap. It's just like a home, and then so that you don't even need to have a packaging of your water. It's just come out from your tap, and then it's drinkable. But we must need to look into different technologies and innovative solutions right now.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So I understand now that there's a lot of local legislations that need to be met, and a lot of issues that impact on this decision to move away from bottled water. So, but luckily we don't have that problem in Hong Kong, and we've been able to move forward. I wanted to touch on your disposable amenities as well, because I think you're quite advanced in having to have done this, trialed this in China already, and I'm wondering what takeaways have you do you have already in how to convince the customer subtly that this is an okay concept, because surely we know that customers don't like change and they have certain expectations. So is there a plan to kind of preempt the challenges that you foresee how are you planning to preempt these challenges as you move forward to removing all of these amenities from your guest rooms?
Thank you for the question. It's also when we discuss, like, how we phase out, and definitely one thing that we need to engage our customers. And when we start looking into the alternatives of our guest room amenities, we started the process since last year that to look into reusable, and then or other eco alternative, or even the packaging of all our guest room amenities. We also start to look into is like, do we really need to offer everything, all the tiny little, you imagine, right? All the boxes, little boxes in the guest room. So we started to really think, we started the discussion internally, should we just, all these amenities should be offered upon request for among all our hotels. It's a discussion. It's not yet finalized, but we started talking about it. And then, because when we start talking about it, it's like, okay, actually those luxury hotel in the US and Europe, they don't have the amenities in the guest rooms. I mean, travelers will accept that, because right now I think people travel much more often than ever before, well, except this year. But then they normally, everyone become frequent travelers, and they normally will have a pack with them already. It's not like the setup of guest room amenities was 20 years ago, and it has never changed. We just put in more items to fill more luxury. And is it really true luxury? So that's why we also will have a community engagement. So one of our community share value project that we will also launch, start planning. Actually, we want to engage our traveler to be a conscious traveler. So not only waste plastic, but it's all aspects that, we have a whole series of package within the hotel, and then to engage our customer when they just first start getting into our hotel, the whole journey will have options, eco-friendly options, so that they can have so-called, now the term in Europe, more guilt-free stay with us. So it's a plan. It's on our 10 years straight. I hope that you won't take us 10 years to launch the project, but hopefully in the 2 years. But then that will be also the direction that we want to put into place.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Carmen. We look forward to seeing these initiatives coming to play over the next few years. Now, Doug, you've got an interesting position where you look across a lot of industries, and you're able to, obviously with the focus on plastic, and you've experienced a lot over the years. In Hong Kong, it's one thing to talk to the hotels who have guests who have a little bit more money to spend on packaging, who are possibly a little bit more conscious. But in Hong Kong in general, we are disposing of about 200 tons of plastic dining ware a day to landfill. So that's not just hotels, obviously. That's all the little mom and pop shops around. That's all of our fast food restaurants. It's a huge problem. So across the board with food and beverage packaging, what would your recommendations be, having looked at this over a number of years, and of course taking into consideration what Iris and Carmen have mentioned about the different products and how they're handled and how different cities can handle them as well.
Yeah, sure. So I'd just like to start with one point and reflect on Carmen's some great secret comments there that I don't know if she was making, if she knew she was making. But, you know, a lot of this is about being bold and having the right message and telling your customers in a good way. And I believe most entities haven't learned how to do that yet very well. There's a fear factor of what the customer is going to say. And Carmen just said that she's done this around China and they haven't complained yet. Now, some could argue that things happen there in different ways because they abide by rules pretty easily. But this really comes down to marketing and PR and how you are describing these changes to your customers. And if the first thing you say is it's too expensive to adopt something new as an alternative, the client should say, well, the expense that you just saved is now going into my environment and my city in the form of waste. So when you take Dana's numbers of 100, 200 tons a day, I think you said 40 tons of that. I couldn't believe it when I heard when you said that. 40 tons is styrofoam. So can you imagine that? That's by weight. Can you imagine the volume of that material, styrofoam, which is 10 to 20 times bigger in size than that weight, which we are now using, simply because people need to be cheap and save a tiny bit of money, 1 cent, on a takeout box at their restaurant. So China is planning to ban styrofoam. I would expect and hope that the Hong Kong government, knowing that they are part of China, will follow these rules. Sometimes they don't do that, but we're one country and we should be following these kind of rules. If you have that system in place and you have an even playing field, then it's everyone will pay the same price on whatever the new alternatives are. And you will get economies of scale and cheaper pricing for all the new materials, which are now bulk bought in larger volumes. So we have to let the innovators and the entrepreneurs get into the market with orders from companies like the Mandarin and Langham, and for that matter, all of the association members on this call, because without your marketing power and buying, we don't get economies of scale. And then the excuse always will be, this is too expensive for me today and I can't get a new one. So when you start looking at the issue of biodegradable versus plastic, for example, all the plastic boxes for takeouts now, those could be recycled, and we need to either make a decision. Do we want to use the reverse supply chain? Do we want to fix the hygiene concerns and recover those plastic boxes from the consumers and their houses with the delivery vehicles back to a place where they can be reused, not reused, but ground up, purified, recycled, and made into something new? If we're not willing to take that step, then we'll never get to the next level of alternative. If we have biodegradable, then of course, we can also start thinking about bringing in that industrial composter. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. When you have the volume of material, then there's a rationale and reason for to work with universities and work with this association to get a composter in the city to facilitate the mingling of food waste, which we've already talked about, and some of this biomaterial, which can go into essentially should be going into the same kind of machine. Then we could actually solve this, but we need all the wheels and kind of players to be working together to make one of those decisions. And actually both of those can work in parallel, because not everything is going to be solved in either stream of plastic recovery or the bio use, most likely. I hope that answered a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Actually, you answered my next question, which was how could the F&B industry kind of work together on this? So you talked about the economies of scale and how we need to ramp up our solutions and working together. So I don't need to ask that question. And just given the timing, I think it would be good if we moved on to the questions that are asked in the chat. Lucia?
Yes, thank you so much for all the contributions. So actually there are 3 questions and one for each of you, I would say. So we can go through them and then we will go into the coffee break. So for those of you who have just connected, we are running a little bit over time. And we have 1 question for Iris, 1 for Carmen, and 1 for Doug. I think that they are relevant. So I'm gonna say, read out the first one. Is it possible the replacements of plastic have greater environmental and diversity impact adversely? For example, if paper is used increasingly to replace plastic, it can encourage deforestation and chemical use. Hence, is replacement of plastic chosen comparatively to minimize overall environmental impact? And in relationship to that, is actually something similar, like, is there any framework or decision tree that you are as hotels and sustainability directors in your respective properties using to say which items will be eliminated by what? And if there is no option on the market, feasible option on the market, do you still then continue using plastic? So it's either Carmen or Iris, I would say. Which one would like to take this? Iris, I think, yeah, there you are. Okay, then go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this. I think the answer is, yeah, you're spot on. Of course, there are more considerations when you're trying to displace plastic. And we've gone through that process, right? Because we've come up with this kind of bold statement. And the answer I can give is, following that pledge that we've made, we realized we need to have a strong procurement framework, a responsible procurement framework. This conference is all about waste. And so it's fair to say that when we're looking at the plastic problem, we can't sort of forget about everything, all the other learnings and considerations along the way. So there's things like carbon footprint, right? There's the fact that it's not just necessarily single-use plastics, there's single-use waste in general. So it's funny that you brought up paper, because we actually have listed paper products as of this year as something that we have a guideline on. And yes, we have identified, I think it was here, he was saying that it was FSC certified. So that's within our guideline of what we would prefer as a certification. And because we're still kind of going through a learning process in our organization, every year, and this is something I think that Carmen can attest to, we're constantly evolving as well that framework and the policies and the guidelines that we're sharing with our group. So it's still an evolution of a process, but the answer to answer your question, yes, there's likely alternatives that could be better. Aseptic packaging, Tetra Pak was brought up, and actually we found that there's actually 20% plastic in aseptic packaging. So what do you do when the company comes to you and they say, but we are offering a full recycling proposition with it, and we're locally based? Is that presumably better than shipping glass packaged water from, you know, another continent? That's something that we're amidst review right now. But at the end of the day, I think it's good that we're having these conversations and really challenging ourselves to kind of seek more research and opinions so that we can be informed as we take our decisions as a group.
Thank you. Thank you, Iris. So maybe this one could be taken by Carmen. Have you considered asking guests prior to their stay about amenities they need and only providing those which they opt in, or any financial or other incentive for guests to reduce their use of single-use plastic during their stay?
Thank you for the question. And actually, this is in our mindset. So that's why I shared the program that we want to prepare is to engage our guests to be conscious travelers. So one of the concept is also like where before they arrival that we will ask them we will perhaps that we have to communicate it very clearly also with the guests that like is a program that we call it is a Guest of the Earth program. And then like before you check in, like, do you want to participate in this program? And these are the elements that, you know, along your stay with us that will be involved in this Guest of the Earth program. If they were up in, then like, you know, we will just prepare your stay as according to that program. That is in our mind like now that like we're in under preparation. But I also want to brought up is communication to the guests is very, very important. I still remember when I go to the hotel, it's very simple, as simple. I think some hotels can start, you know, communicating with the guests, because if you don't, they don't know what you're doing. And I mean, just as simple like if your guest room has an espresso machines, and in fact that your hotel, I assume that many of us will participate in the capsule recycling program. And in your Nespresso machines, like, you know, in the capsule box that you should mention, like, you know, the capsule will be recycled, how it's being recycled. And if this information communicating to your guests, I mean, they will feel like, you know, I'm being involved, and, you know, actually your hotel is doing something. Because waste is something like, you know, it's not like a light bulb or you know, like the waterfall set, like, you know, it's everything behind the scene. And I think it's really now that we need to communicating with our guests in all these great initiative that we are doing.
Thank you, Carmen. And then last question I got for Doug, because I think he will have a knowledge about this. And the question is, just one out of curiosity, has there been any relevant or up-to-date data statistics governed by a reputable third party about plastic waste generated per industry? So say, for instance, restaurants, hotels, private apartments, etc. Do you have any knowledge about that, Doug?
Is for Hong Kong or for other countries?
It doesn't specify in the question. So if you have anything you can share with us, what you know right now?
Actually, I would say this is one of the challenges, and there's not a lot of good information like that. This is why the Plastic Disclosure Project is important, because if every hotel was to do it, then you'd have a standardization, a metric of the plastic volume used per dollar spent or per room or per customer within a hotel. You basically have a plastic intensity number. Even if you're a restaurant, you can say that out of 200 people who use my restaurant, only 2% happen to have a plastic item related to that. So these numbers, especially from the household, are not easy to find. There's general municipal solid waste numbers for Hong Kong. I believe the rough number for Hong Kong's plastic use per person per household is 1.2 kilos. I don't remember if it's per day or if I think it's per day or week or per week, but that includes all of the packaging that you would get at your grocery store and your you know, daily use of things that you'd throw away. That's one of the higher in the world. Regardless what the number is, Hong Kong is one of the highest in the world for plastic packaging. Japan is also extremely high because they use a lot of it. And just because they recover it doesn't mean that it goes in the right place after they sort it, which is a big sort of missed idea there. A lot of their material was going to China, just like the West was, to recycle. So if we look at ourselves, which Mandarin and Langham have done, and they've reduced 64%, Mandarin, you can tell quite quickly that even if you have little resources, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at your inventory list of what you're using and think about where you could at least get rid of some low-hanging fruit. You might get 10 or 15% of a great story very quickly, and that can help engage your company employees and your clients to motivate to move into different materials. On the household side, that's you know, some of the delivery companies have given options for not delivering utensils every single time they deliver a box, because normally at your house and even your office you would have utensils, so you don't need those plastic ones. There's a lot of opportunity in this whole bring back area, where you can have rinsed and cleaned materials and go back to somewhere to be recycled. So I think we need a bit of legislation help. That's always extremely difficult in Hong Kong. And therefore it's probably groups like yours, which is the the alliance of hotels and F&B, that can team together to show the government that we really want to have these standardized changes, at least on the most basic things that can make a big impact for our waste system here. So hopefully, this community on this call it can help along with that, and Hong Kong U.
Thank you, Doug. So I think also I wanted to note, just mention that we have done some research, and it was a desktop research on like what data is available for Hong Kong, specifically on the plastic production per industry. We haven't found any relevant source of that. We only know it as a category, commercial waste, and that's everything, right? Including offices, well, anything that is not a household essentially. So that was quite difficult for us to track. So we have been thinking about it, like how can we identify the exact numbers for the industry? And to our knowledge, there is no such data available, at least in Hong Kong. So thank you so much for answering the questions. I will let Dana to wrap up the panel, and then we will go into the short break.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists today and our speaker, Christelle, that started off our discussion. In summary, just a few takeaway points. One thing I wanted to mention, which ties into what Heidi said in the previous panel and what Doug is saying, that businesses need to monitor their waste to find a baseline. And I think that is where everybody has to start. No matter how big you are, how small you are, we need to get a baseline and address straight away those low-hanging fruit. That doesn't require really very much research. You may find you can just get rid of it, certain items. So if you haven't done it yet, definitely, whether you need help from another company to do it, or just start taking inventory of your own company, that's where we need to start. I also loved hearing about the engaging of customers and the whole marketing. Usually marketing, I kind of take it with a pinch of salt. But I think there's really a lot of positive that can come out of marketing to our customers across the industry. I love the idea of guilt-free travel. Instead of focusing on what you're not giving your guests, let them know that this is making your travel guilt-free. You're doing something great. And Carmen, I think you mentioned, pointing out that you get a tick when you recycle that Nespresso capsule. So there's a lot of opportunity to do this in a really good way. I also think something that Doug just mentioned on as well is that we need to work with our industry organizations and our whether they're the industry organizations pulling together, but also the tourist boards and the government. But if we start with these groups who are doing this fabulous work, come together, show the government that we're really serious about this, maybe they'll start to listen a little bit more. But as an industry, I think we'll have a lot of leverage. And we need the government there. If we have legislation which will help level the playing field, it will make these changes a lot easier. Companies won't think I'm going to go, to the other hotel where I can get it. Whereas if there's legislation, we don't have to worry about that. As far as another connection with the food waste talk is on the composting. So if we did choose as an industry that, biodegradable products, packaging is the way to go, there is the problem of the fact that it's going to go to landfill. But if we can come together, say, this is the volume that we are going to create of this waste, we'll get the economies of scale, we'll get the prices down, but we'll also be able to hopefully lobby or get commercial interest in a composting facility. So that will tie in with what Heidi discussed about the need for food waste composting, and it will help solve a lot of the packaging, food and beverage packaging problems as well. So what this comes down to is a lot of, I think, communication and coordination between the industry. And I hope that this forum, the Green Hospitality Conference organization, might be a conduit to pull everybody together, to gather all of the information that everybody has been working on for the last 2 or 3 years, all of these resources to share with other people, but also to come together and figure out how we can make change, whether that's going through the industry organizations or through the government or businesses, for-profit businesses. So I look forward to being able to do that. Lucia, I'm going to leave that in your capable hands to help facilitate. And our action is to gather your information that you have and be ready to hopefully share it for others to use and benefit from. So thank you again to all of the participants for their information today.